Anyone can buy an apartment building, but not everybody can operate it well. The problem is poor operations quietly eat away at returns, frustrate residents, and kill momentum. The best operators, they run their properties like a business, not a hobby. Today, we're unpacking what top performing multifamily operators do differently from how they think to how they execute so that you can model their success and outperform the average investor. Now, if you're interested in investing into real estate and you can't find any good deals, check out fulloutinvesting.com, where you can see our 10-step full out investing process and a simple deal. So that next deal that comes along that Faris Capital has, you'll be first to see and to understand how these deals work. So go to fulloutinvesting.com. John, it's great to be here with you.
So good to be here, Mark. You know, the poor operations thing is always so interesting to me because how often we run across it, right? So when we're looking at assets, we're looking at a potential deal that we're considering. We have a robust checklist, but one of the first things we do is we check the property's current reviews, right? And if we see great reviews, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that could be considered a good thing, but we candidly like to see the bad reviews because it just
love it. We love it, John. We don't like it. We love it.
We love it. That's
like
right.
Money in the Bank.
It's like easy. It's like that's an easy fix. We can take care of that. And man, we were looking at a property recently. In fact, it's one we're circling as we speak. And, you know, there were so many bad reviews in such a short amount of time, about 6 months. So the property was probably averaging 4.5 stars. And what happened is the operator changed management companies. And that management company took them from that 4.5 down to almost a 3 within 6 months. And if you read the reviews, man, it's just they're not returning people's phone calls. There were people that were waiting 2 months to get their security deposit back, which is like, by the way, against the law. And so it's amazing what you can come across in this industry. And so you listening to this might think, well, gosh, of course, all operators would be monitoring reviews and checking metrics and things like that, but you would be very surprised. And so at Faris Capital Partners, I mean, when we talk about it, we are a business buying another business. That's how we think about it. It's no different than private equity, right? And our job is to improve the operations, improve the efficiency, but not everybody has that outlook. So this is a really exciting topic I'm looking forward to diving into.
Yeah, John, and if you start thinking about this as buying a business, like you had mentioned, everything changes. And so we look at net operating income like EBITDA in a business. And so with our backgrounds in business and building and scaling, ultimately the financial metrics, they'll tell you everything. And so, but the key is to actually start tracking. And then also the other thing is that not all metrics are the same. There's lead metrics or lead indicators. So, and then there's lag indicators. And so lag indicator is more so like, what is the overall result? So net operating income is more of a lag indicator, but a lead indicator would be more so how many resident tours. That's upstream from the lag indicator of net operating income. Just like in a business, it's like, I want to do 100 sales in a year. It's like, okay, what's upstream from that? And so if agreements are upstream from sales and maybe appointments are upstream from agreements, and then leads and conversations are actually upstream from appointments, then the number one metric that we want to be able to focus on and drive on a daily basis and report on a daily basis is upstream. So how many leads and conversations? And so this actually goes back to the brokerage business, John, where, I have an agent that says to me, it's like, I want to get a lot of sales. And I'm like, okay, let's look at your schedule. Let's look at how many actual calls, how many conversations are you having on a daily basis? And so we would like engineer and work backwards. And then it's just a matter of, if you want to do more sales in the back end, start with more conversations, and then we'll measure it along the way. But most operators don't think of real estate investments like that. It's more of a passive sport, which, John, by the way, is one of our biggest differentiators and how we attack and why our properties are outperforming the average property, and why when we're doing our competition tour, when we're doing our tours, we're seeing like low-hanging fruit that they could implement right away. But that's one of our competitive advantages.
Yeah. I mean, we were touring a rent comp recently, and the community had like 3 people on staff. So they were well staffed. But you might even remember this one, Mark. It was kind of raining outside, but there was like 17 people in the leasing center coming and going. People were just walking in and getting stuff. And it just, we were standing around going, okay, like we don't want to be intrusive or in the way, but like, and it just was clear that they had the staffing right. They just didn't have the systems right. Everybody was just kind of grabbing whatever they can grab hold of to try to solve whatever problems just wandered in their door. And, when you have systems in place, a lot of that gets avoided, right? And so that's a great example. I think, what you just said, though, is such a critical component, that lead versus lag measure. Mark, I know you read the Franklin Covey book, Four Disciplines of Execution. So if you're listening to this and you haven't read that book and you're a business owner, entrepreneur, most of our investors are, definitely scoop that book up, because what I found is so often people think they're measuring the right thing, but they're actually like 4 or 5 metrics off, right? So it's like, if NOI is off at the end of the year, there's too late to do anything about it. But if you have the right lead measures in place early on, right? So in our world, it's how many people are touring, what are our leads, how many conversations are the property managers having? We can predict what's going to happen in 6 months today, and we can make changes to make sure that we still hit that goal. So that lead lag measure thing, that's a little elusive to some people, but really thinking about what's that first domino, that if I push this domino over, everything else becomes easier, right? And in that context of residential, it's conversations, it's leads. It's really not all that different here. It's how many resident leads are we getting? How many tours are we doing? And if we do those things really well, and we have a curated tour, which we do, and we maximize those conversions, then the NOI is going to get taken care of at the end of the day. And so really focusing in, if you're running a business, really think, what's that one thing I can be doing, or what's the one thing this team member can be doing that'll make their job easier? And if you think about that hard, and you keep thinking about it just a little bit more, you usually find it. It's not an easy process, but if you really spend some time on it, it'll transform your business.
For 100%. And when you start narrowing down the actual metrics along the way in order to have a net result, you can actually start documenting, and you should be, and we have documented all the steps along the way and how we do things. So we're not just winging it. And then we can start tracking the actual conversion rates and how things are going. And so if you have a set process and say a conversion rate is not where it should be, or you want to improve it, well, now you have a standardized approach that you can go in and tweak, improve, and get feedback on, and then keep doing that loop over and over and over. And that's how excellence happens in business. It's not an overnight thing. It's a feedback thing. And the only way you can improve it is if you clearly document how you do it to start with. And so this is a big one with scripting that I get a lot from, in the sales field, is like, I don't like scripts. I don't like, it's too scripty. I don't like that. I like being me. And it's like, the interesting thing is, if you go in an appointment and you have a set process for what you say, then after the fact, if you didn't close, you can go back and analyze, did I do this? It's like, oh, I missed this. You have a standardized approach. And you might actually, the cool thing with the standardized approach too, is you might actually say something that was like, you ever have that, John, when you're in an appointment and you're like, oh my goodness, like I was like a genius in there. I don't know where that came from, but when I said this, they responded and it was like magic and fireworks went off. The cool thing there is you can actually capture that, because most operators would basically, they would have that as a moment and then it would disappear into the abyss. But you can capture that and actually include that in your standardized process, and then do it and improve it moving forward on an ongoing basis. And that's how, people ask, is like, what's the golden bullet? Like, what's the silver bullet? It's like, there's no silver bullet. It's a reiterative, ongoing, they say, is like golden BBs. I know that Alex Hormozi talks about that. One of the best entrepreneurs that I've been able to follow out there. It's like, success is about golden BBs. It's about the small things. And so everything we're talking about today is about, we'll just say, ongoing tracking and ongoing focus on improving each step along the way just a little more. Little better. And by doing that over time, that's what creates massive results. It compounds over time.
And what I found is, if you've got the right team in place, there could even be initially some resistance, right? Because to your point, I got my process and it sort of works, but you muscle through that, you push through it. And then what eventually happens is the team starts to see it, and they love that idea of that continuous improvement, right? And so, that optimization component, and I think that, for us, that's a large part of our culture. It's just that we've got the systems, we've got the resources, we're eliminating decision-making by building that stuff out, right? Because now it's just all about the resident in Faris Capital Partners, context, right? Like, that's all they have to think about, because they don't have to think about, well, am I going to take them by the pool first this time or the gym first this time? No, we have the whole walk path curated. In fact, we'll do a whole topic on our curated tour here soon, because it's something, we put a lot of time and attention into. It wasn't just like, all right, just walking by the amenities. No, it's like we have a map of every property, and we show step 1, step 2, step 3, all the way through the entire tour. And we're inserting in, little wow moments along the way. We're inserting in closes along the way. So the idea is that at the end of that tour, they're either going to sign with us or they're not, moving. They're going to stay where they're at. Like if they're moving, in other words, we're winning that deal. And so that, is one of the main points. You touched on the first one, right? They optimize system. That's what the best operators do. The other thing they do is they are never passive, right? They're always proactive, and they're always looking for those ways to improve and to be an active steward of their investments, right? And I think when you think about occupancy and profitability, right, there's a lot of operators that have 100% occupied buildings that are losing money, right? So it's about optimizing, and knowing the difference between being 95% full and 100% efficient, right? And those are two different things. So yeah, man, big topic to dive into. So some of the things that I would say, Mark, that really operators do differently, and we've touched on this, but it's the metrics, right? What gets measured gets managed, right? So every one of our employees at Faris Capital Partners and every one of our property managers has specific metrics that they have to report to on a daily basis, right? So just having those lead measures that we already talked about clearly defined, clearly outlined, with clear targets on our expectations, with occasional tweaks, right? If we're getting a result, that's great. How do we make it a little bit better? So if we have, for example, 10 tours and we're at 96% occupancy, what if we schedule 12 tours? What would it take to do that? And then what are the activities that will result in that? And then that's what we talk about. That's all we talk about with our team there. And they don't wait for problems to show up. They see them coming, because when you're so deep in those lead measures, once again, if you see your leads dip in February, you're going to know your April leases are going to be down. So what do we need to do today to increase that lead flow? Do we need to look at other channels? Do we need to make a change to our ad copy? Whatever the thing is, to make sure that those leads get back to where we know they need to be for us to hit our goals.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, collections, delinquencies, turnover rate, maintenance response times, net operating trends versus budget. These are all things that we're tracking on an ongoing basis. And for us, it's the number of leads that are coming in as well, the number of tours that are coming in, the number of signed leases or applications. We're tracking that on an ongoing basis. And the cool thing is we can start to see trends along the way by tracking week over week. And then part of the conversation on a week over week basis is how can we improve and make it better?
That's right. A big thing, Mark, and this is also something that sometimes blows my mind, because I actually love doing it, but the best operators tour their assets regularly. So in our world, for you and I, that's typically quarterly. For our asset manager, that's typically monthly or bi-monthly. We go on site and we actually walk the property. And by the way, this isn't just we pull into the parking lot, walk into the leasing center, go up, everything looks great, and leave. Like I, get my steps in. Let's just put it that way when I'm on our properties. In other words, we walk every single building, every breezeway, go up and down every flight of steps. It's small stuff, but I was at one of our properties recently, and we had just had the ductwork cleaned out, and I walked by a unit on the 3rd floor, and I just saw there was a big collection of lint that was just hanging out of the dryer. And by the way, that's a potential fire hazard. So I just called that out. Nobody's in trouble. It's just, hey, Dom, he's our construction manager. He happened to be in town that week. I just said, I know we just had these cleaned, but I took a picture, sent it to him. He's like, I'm on it. A light fixture we had installed recently was just a little askew, and so that's the level of detail, all the way down to carrying around a plastic baggie and picking up cigarette butts and candy wrappers.
Well, you remember that. So when we actually had one of our properties, we had to transition out the property manager and the leasing manager as well. And actually, one of the things that led up to that is when we visited the property, you remember, we walked up and we started seeing there was a piece of garbage here. It was there, or there's somebody, the garbage was overflowing. And so we started picking up. And then next thing you know, we said, okay, we need to get a bag. We got too much. And then we started walking around. We walked the whole property and we picked up all the garbage, and we had multiple bags of garbage. And it was like the leasing agent and the property manager that was there, we walked in, it was like, we got all this garbage. So it's the perfect example of leading by example.
That's it.
And so when we went in, it was like, this is how our properties are. And John, when we ended up transitioning out, How did that next tour go when you went? Did you find a whole lot of garbage
Let's
when
just
you?
say, outside of, look, nobody's perfect. You might find one thing, but I could pick it up in my hand and put it in the trash, right? I didn't have to get a trash bag out. So no, they've been pretty much damn near perfect every time I've walked through them since then. And what's amazing though is I'd like to call out Corey, who runs our Largo property, because a week later I was down there with Georgia, our asset manager, and we were walking, and I just see her eyes like hit the ground. And so I start looking, and right out in front of a unit, somebody had been throwing their cigarette butts. And I didn't have to say a thing. She took a photo and she took a note on her phone. And I asked her what the next step is. She says, well, I'm going to send them a leasing violation. I'm going to go ahead and document the leasing violation. She said, I already talked to this guy about this. You can't just dump your cigarette butts out here. And, it's just she knew what to do and proactively took that step. So that's when you got the right person where like I didn't even have to tell her. She just knew it was the right thing and went out there and did it.
Oh,
But
so
I
good.
love walking these properties, Mark.
Yeah.
Number one, it's just cool, to see the work and then to see the residents. And when residents walk by, we're asking them how their day's going, what their name is, how do they like living here? Is there anything we can do to improve?
Which
And so,
John, by the way, I've spoken to other operators about this, and they were like, "You really talk to them? It's like then you're going to give them an avenue to start complaining." I'm like, "Hey, listen, I want to. If there's a complaint, I want to know what that is." And so that just by having conversations with the residents, you hear the real truth. And so the best leaders, what they do, it's one of the things I was studying a little bit more about how Elon Musk can actually do so much. Like I'm shocked on how he can run all these multi-billions of companies. But one of the things that I identified that came out is that what he does is he actually goes right to the front lines and he gets the real data from the front lines there in the trenches directly himself.
yeah.
Rather than it going through all his chain of command stuff, right? Goes through 4 levels where, by the time it gets to us, John, it's all watered down, right? We want to know exactly at ground level. And so the residents, that to me is the conversations, they've been invaluable. Sorry, I keep going. You're on.
No, it's funny because
Yeah.
you made such a good point. I learned a lesson from an executive coach early on that I work with, James Larson, incredible guy. And he basically said, look, companies that don't ask their, clients or, their customers for feedback already know the answer. And what he was saying is they're afraid to ask because they know they're going to get bad feedback, right? And so that operator who said that, that's probably what was in their mind. Because once again, immediately it was like, oh no, they're just going to complain. Well, shouldn't we be more thinking about how do we make it to where there's nothing to complain about? Maybe that should be the goal. And so, we survey our residents along the way, but when we're on site, we're absolutely asking that question. In fact, I personally respond to our Google reviews and I sign them with my name and my title. Now, I don't put my name and my phone number and email address on there because I don't want to be spammed by a million people. Like, in other words, like the bots that scrape for that data. But it's pretty easy for somebody to type my name in and find me really quickly. And we've had a few residents call in. Now, more recently, we had one because they were calling in to give us some kudos for a job well done, and they just really wanted us to know that our property managers took great care of them, which was fantastic. But if the worst thing that happened to me today is a resident called and gave me something that we could actually improve, that's a good day, And so 100%. But those on-site property visits are critical. Is there something happening in the area that I need to be aware of? In other words, is there a new building being constructed, 3 blocks down, or do they just break ground? And oh God, I better look into the permitting and see what's going on here and how that might impact us. So it's so important beyond even just your property.
Well, and that's where when we did that visit, when we had to, what led up to changing that property manager and that leasing agent and one of our assets is the garbage was starting to get overflow. And and it's like, we came on the one day that it was overflowing. It's like, well, that doesn't happen. That's just on the one day. But it was like, okay, we got to change the process here because it cannot be one day, it can't be 1 hour, can't be 1 minute of overflown the garbage is overfilled.
Yeah.
And so we got to get an extra day there to make sure that we don't get to that point. And so it goes back to the best business owners, they fix problems before they even come up. So you can be proactive on that. And actually, it's one of the things going back to the whole garbage pickup. It reminds me a lot of Walt Disney. That was one of his key things of why he wanted to build Disney World, was because he was really upset. And when he brought his grandkids to these carnivals, these fairs, there was garbage everywhere, it was dirty. And he's like, I want to create something that is just clean, it's safe. And so, for them, they actually went to the extent of having certain amount of in between the garbage cans. They actually measured it. I don't have the exact number, but they knew that if people had to walk more than X amount of steps to be able to get to a garbage, that it would probably be on the floor. But if they spread lots of them throughout, and then they made sure that they weren't filled, people were going to throw it in the trash can. And so that to me is the approach with us and Faris Residence, is you set the standard, and then you inspect what you expect. And I think that's the next point there, John, is like, this is not set it and forget it.
Yes.
Right. This is not something that the best operators is an ongoing thing, because complacency is just a natural thing. And people, they if they're not getting checked on it, eventually the bar will slowly start to subside, then, catching it along the way.
Yeah, Mark, this is going to be sound a little off topic, but I was reading recently that, when you're working with an AI platform, that you need to ask it to think deeply about the topic that you're, inquiring about. And so I was like, why is that? That's so odd. And I was talking to somebody recently who's like an expert on AI, and he said, well, keep in mind, AI was created by humans, and no different from humans. It's already looking for shortcuts and like ways to avoid work. And so by telling it to think deeply, you're actually making it pause and go, okay, I actually have to do some work here. So even AI looks for that, like that path of least resistance, right? So that's kind of goofy, but it's a real thing. And I thought it was like super interesting, but human beings are no different. And so that's where one of the things operators do differently that are excellent is they have regular meeting cadences with their property management team. To your point, this is not set it and forget it. So our asset manager has a weekly meeting with each PM team. So on a weekly basis, she's meeting with each asset's property management team. And then we do 2 huddles strategically throughout the week. So those meetings are typically on Wednesday. So it gives us the weekend, to kind of work through the tours, get the leases, or any applications processed and ideally signed. So Wednesday is kind of that weekly cadence. But on Monday and Friday morning, she meets with each. And so every property manager across all of our assets is on that call, and everybody's reporting on some good news from the last huddle, between now and the last huddle, their top number one metric and the number one priority they need to get done that day. So no different than at Faris Capital, we do that with our Faris Residences team. What's so great is that, if something works really well at Largo, that surfaces on that call and now can be implemented across all of our different buildings. And to that point, we do have systems and processes for everything, but the frontline people often have the best solutions. And so, if Corey in Largo says, man, we tried this and it really worked well, or we did this small thing for our residents and we got 6 great reviews and it led to an increase in leads, then we can implement that everywhere. So that knowledge is just shared almost immediately with everybody. And then on a monthly basis, she's meeting with the higher level property manager, like the regional folks, and doing a deep dive into the financials. And then further, Madison, our CPA, Director of Finance, Asset Manager, and myself have a meeting where we go through the financials of each one. So there's 10 sets of eyes on everything. So one of us may catch something that somebody else missed. Well, wait, why is that number trending up or down? For example, it's a small thing, but we had a water leak at one of our properties. So our water bill went up $3,000. And you catch that, you're like, well, what happened? Well, there was a water leak. Has it been remedied? Yes. Do we expect the number to go back to 12,000 next month? Yes. Okay, great. I can put that aside. But I'm not going to find out about a problem 6 months later because I wasn't being diligent and paying attention. So we build strong relationships with the PM team. We have regular meeting cadences with them. And along the way, we're supporting, we're coaching, we're sharing data and our goals very transparently. And we structure bonus opportunities for those people wrapped around the company's, or really the asset's goals. So if we have an NOI goal, they're going to get a little piece if they hit that goal or exceed that goal, right? So their compensation is tied to the success of the asset, not just to something that makes them feel good. It's what's going to take care of our investors at the end of the day. And that's driving that NOI, which is either through increasing income or decreasing expenses. So all those things are something we're doing to stay very tight and close to our property management teams and ensure they're aligned, not only with the goals of the company, but the goals of that specific asset.
Yeah, the rewarding financial, that's great. And then in addition to that, just like ongoing praise, a lot of people will work harder for praise than they will for money. And so that's one of the things, John, when we get a 5-star Google review, that comes right up to us, and we're direct, personally, we're applauding the property manager, great job, keep it up, And so that comes from multiple, these are coming from the owners of the property manager. And they just get stoked on that, which is amazing. Yeah. That's what I would want to know. I'd want to make sure that, the higher ups, or whatever you want to call them, are acknowledging and they're seeing all their hard work. And so that's one of the things that, John, we're very intentional Georgia, our asset manager, and the rest of the team, very intentional about giving them praise along the way. Now, one other thing that I just want to quickly mention, then we'll wrap this up here. We're coming to the end, is that when you set metrics, it's really important that you're not only tracking the existing metric, the existing numbers, but one of the biggest, we'll say, shortcomings that I see in businesses is when they track metrics, but they don't actually have a target. And so they don't know if the number is good or not. It seems so basic, but it's like they're reporting on a number. It's like, is that good or bad? They're like, well, it's good. I'm like, well, how do I know it's good or bad? They're like, well, and then there's this big, long, elaborate explanation versus setting the target ahead of time and then tracking where you're at from target to actual. And then how do you close the gap? That's the bigger question. And this is how we always did it, is not the right response. This is something that's a big no-no for us. When we hear that, John, it's like, we got our flags going up here. Just because it's always the way that you've always done it doesn't mean that that's the best way. We can take, okay, what was good from that, but what are some other ways? And a lot of times the answer is it's not white or black, right? There is a lot of times there's 3 or 4 or 5 or maybe 10 different ways that you can do it. And so for us, whenever we're looking at how do we analyze and get to the bottom of this, it's okay, it's not right or wrong. It's 10 different answers that maybe we're not seeing. And so we try to go deeper by asking the question, how can we make it better?
Well, before we wrap up, I think that's such a great point. You always have to have that target. So if you're newer to this concept or idea, or you're running a business, sometimes you just have to put a number on it, right? So in other words, when we first started, we said, well, 5 broker conversations a day is probably the right place to start. If we have 5 conversations a day, we should be able to get the deal flow that we need to hit our goals and our targets for our investors. Well, pretty quickly, we found that it worked, but we also said, well, shoot, it's working so well. What if we did 10, and we increased it? So sometimes just starting with the numbers, right? And then you measure the results, and then you can adjust from there once you see the results. So thinking about a salesperson, candidly, some salespeople might have to have fewer conversations to get a certain result. So maybe if you're newer to sales, you might have to have more conversations. So it's not always cookie cutter either. Every property is going to be a little bit different around those metrics. But when you're constantly engaging with them and on a weekly basis, you're reviewing these things, the numbers don't lie. I mean, that's the bottom line here, Mark. When it comes to these metrics, numbers do not lie, right?
That's right.
And so, you either hit it or you didn't, right? And so if not, what are we going to do about it? And one of our fundamentals, you pointed out, we challenge the status quo. So it literally is defined as we don't just do the same thing over and over again because it's worked in the past. We always look for ways to optimize and improve. And so it's baked into our culture. But anyway, that's great, Mark.
No, good insights. And, I'll finish off with this thought. There's only one thing that can fit in the box, a number, and a story won't fit in the box. And so we'll leave it at that. When you're tracking your metrics, the numbers don't lie, as you said, John. There's real wisdom in that. And so if you are a high net worth individual and you are wanting to invest into real estate, go to fulloutinvesting.com and you'll find out more about our 10-step full out investing process and what differentiates us and how we're able to get more than the average when it comes down to rent, and also how we're protecting the downside. And there's a sample deal in there as what one of our future deals may look like as well. And you can also book a call with us. Go to fulloutinvesting.com to find out more. Thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share with other high net worth investors that you think will benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.